What if you decided to walk around the world and never stopped? In 1998, British ex-paratrooper Karl Bushby set out on a mission no human had ever completed, walking 36,000 miles across 4 continents without using any transport. From the Amazon jungle to Arctic blizzards, he survived robberies, starvation, wild animals, and war zones. He even walked across the frozen Bering Strait, only to be arrested in Russia and deported. But despite decades of setbacks, he never gave up. Now, after more than 20 years, Karl is still walking. Will he complete his impossible journey home? This is the ultimate test of human endurance. Act 1. The impossible dream begins. On a cold November morning in 1998, Karl Bushby stood at the edge of Punta Arenas, Chile, staring out over the vast South American landscape ahead of him. At 29 years old, he had just made a decision that would define his life: to walk from the southern tip of the Americas all the way back to his home in Hull, England, without using a single flight or ship. It was an impossible goal, a 36,000-mile journey that no human had ever completed. But Karl wasn't just chasing adventure. He was chasing history. Born into a military family, Karl had spent years as a British paratrooper, training for harsh conditions and testing his limits. But nothing could truly prepare him for what lay ahead. The plan was ambitious but simple. He would walk north through South America, enter North America, cross the frozen Bering Strait into Russia, and then continue through Asia and Europe until he reached England. He estimated the journey would take about 8 years. What he didn't know was that this journey would stretch for more than 2 decades, filled with dangers, heartbreak, and setbacks that would push him to the edge of human endurance. His journey started with small steps but massive challenges. Within weeks of setting out, he found himself alone in the wilderness, struggling with extreme weather, food shortages, and exhaustion. The harsh terrain of Patagonia tested his endurance, with fierce winds nearly knocking him off his feet and vast stretches of desolate land offering little shelter. He carried only a backpack, a sleeping bag, and a few essentials, relying on his military training to survive. But Karl quickly learned that no amount of training could prepare him for the mental battle ahead, the loneliness, the uncertainty, and the crushing weight of an impossible goal. As he walked deeper into South America, the reality of his journey set in. Would he really make it home on foot? Or would the world prove too vast, too dangerous, and too unforgiving? Act 2. The struggle for survival. As Karl Bushby pushed forward through South America's unforgiving landscapes, the reality of his journey truly set in. What had once seemed like an exciting expedition quickly turned into a brutal test of survival. He faced intense physical exhaustion, extreme weather, and the ever-present threat of danger. Each step brought new obstacles, and each day tested his will to continue. One of the first major challenges came in the Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth. Here, Karl had to endure scorching daytime temperatures and freezing nights, all while carrying limited supplies. Water was scarce, and dehydration became a constant threat. He relied on small villages and the kindness of strangers to stay alive, sometimes going days without proper food or rest. The isolation was crushing. Thousands of miles stretched ahead of him with no end in sight. But it wasn't just nature that stood in his way. As he moved through Central America, Karl found himself in regions plagued by crime and instability. Robberies and muggings became a terrifying reality. On multiple occasions, he was confronted by armed men who saw him as an easy target. His survival skills were put to the test, not just against the elements, but against people. He learned to be cautious, avoiding certain areas at night and sometimes sleeping in hidden locations to avoid attracting attention. Despite the hardships, there were also moments of unexpected kindness. In small villages, locals welcomed him into their homes, offering him food and shelter. They listened in amazement as he shared his story, and many even walked alongside him for short distances, offering words of encouragement. These moments of human connection became the fuel that kept him going, reminding him why he had started this journey in the first place. But the real test of his endurance came when he reached North America. Crossing into the United States, Karl faced an entirely new set of challenges: long stretches of barren highways, extreme weather shifts, and the mental toll of walking thousands of miles alone. His boots wore out, his supplies dwindled, and his body began to break down. The sheer distance seemed impossible, and self-doubt crept in. Would he ever make it home? By the time he reached Alaska, he had already walked thousands of miles. But the hardest part was yet to come. The Bering Strait lay ahead, a frozen, deadly crossing that no human had ever walked before. Could he defy the impossible? Or would this be where his journey finally ended? Pause for a moment and support the channel by liking and subscribing. Now, let's dive back into this amazing story. Act 3. The Impossible Crossing. A Fight Against Nature. By the time Karl Bushby reached Alaska, his body was battered, his supplies were dwindling, and the weight of the journey was pressing down on him. But the hardest part still lay ahead: the Bering Strait, the treacherous ice-covered stretch of ocean separating Alaska from Russia. No human had ever crossed it on foot, and the risks were astronomical. Blinding snowstorms, shifting ice flows, and the constant threat of falling into freezing waters made it one of the most dangerous crossings in the world. But Karl was determined. If he could make it across, he would step onto the vast and uncharted wilderness of Siberia, bringing him one step closer to home. To increase his chances of survival, Karl teamed up with Dmitry Kiefer, an American adventurer who shared his hunger for extreme challenges. Together, they devised a plan. They would drag sleds full of supplies across the ice, navigating between massive frozen slabs that could shift or break at any moment. The crossing would take weeks, and there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. From the very first steps, the Bering Strait proved merciless. Temperatures plunged to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, -45 degrees Celsius, and the bitter Arctic wind sliced through their gear. Every step felt like a battle against nature itself. Their sleds, heavy with food and survival equipment, became anchors, pulling them down. And the ice beneath their feet was dangerously unstable. Some sections were solid, but others cracked and floated away, forcing them to jump across icy chasms where one wrong move meant certain death. As the days passed, exhaustion took its toll. Frostbite numbed their hands and feet, and dehydration became a serious threat. Food rations were carefully measured, but hunger gnawed at them constantly. Sleep was nearly impossible, as the ice beneath them shifted and groaned, threatening to crack open at any moment. They could never truly rest, not when their lives depended on constant vigilance. But the most terrifying moment came when they encountered a polar bear, a silent predator lurking on the ice. The massive creature stalked them from a distance, drawn in by their scent. With nowhere to run and no cover for miles, Karl and Dmitry had to rely on their survival instincts. They made themselves look bigger, shouting and waving their arms, hoping to scare it away. After what felt like an eternity, the bear finally lost interest and wandered off. But the close call was a chilling reminder of how fragile their existence was out here. After 2 grueling weeks against all odds, Karl and Dmitry became the first humans in history to walk across the Bering Strait on foot. The impossible had been done. They had conquered the ice, the cold, and the endless dangers. But just as Karl thought he was making history, he faced an unexpected setback. Russian authorities arrested him for entering the country without a visa. His journey, which had taken him across continents, through deserts, jungles, and frozen wastelands, was suddenly at a standstill. Would this be the end of the Goliath expedition? Or could Karl find a way to keep moving forward? Act 4. A roadblock in Russia. Fighting to keep the dream alive. Karl Bushby had just accomplished the impossible. He had walked across the Bering Strait on foot, making history. But before he could celebrate, Russian authorities detained and deported him. He had entered Siberia without the proper visa, and despite his incredible journey, there was no leniency. He was sent back to the UK, his expedition halted, his dream in jeopardy. For years, Karl battled bureaucracy, trying to obtain permission to re-enter Russia and continue his journey. Paperwork, politics, and red tape stood in his way. The Russian government saw him as an illegal traveler, not an adventurer, and his request was repeatedly denied. It was a crushing blow. After nearly a decade of walking, he found himself stuck, unable to take another step forward. But Karl wasn't the type to give up. He used this forced pause to regroup, train, and strategize. He spoke at events, shared his story, and gained supporters who believed in his mission. His patience paid off. In 2018, over a decade after his deportation, Karl finally received permission to return to Russia. The journey was back on. Back in Siberia, Karl faced a whole new set of challenges. Years had passed, and his body wasn't as strong as it once was. The vast Russian landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Endless tundra, extreme temperatures, and miles of wilderness with no sign of civilization. It was a mental and physical test unlike any before. But he pushed forward, step by step, reclaiming the miles he had lost. Through all the setbacks, Karl never lost sight of his goal, to walk home to England, completing what no one in history had ever done. The journey wasn't over yet, but one thing was clear: nothing could stop him. Act 5. The final stretch. A journey still unfinished. With Russia behind him, Karl Bushby pressed forward, determined to complete his 36,000-mile journey home. Every step brought him closer to England, but the road ahead remained uncertain. Decades had passed since he first set out from Chile in 1998, and the world had changed. Borders tightened, political landscapes shifted, and Karl himself was no longer the young adventurer who first dreamed of this impossible feat. Despite these challenges, he refused to quit. His body bore the marks of years on the road, blisters, exhaustion, and the wear of thousands of miles, but his spirit remained unbroken. Walking through Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Eastern Europe, Karl continued navigating political red tape, visa restrictions, and unpredictable terrain. Each obstacle threatened to derail him, but he adapted, finding ways to keep moving forward. As he neared Europe, his journey gained renewed attention. Media outlets, fellow travelers, and supporters worldwide followed his progress, eager to see him complete what he had started. But Karl knew that finishing wasn't just about crossing a finish line. It was about proving that persistence, resilience, and sheer determination could defy all odds. Though the end was in sight, Karl's journey remains unfinished to this day. He is still walking, still pushing forward, and still proving that some dreams are worth dedicating a lifetime to. Whether he reaches his home in England or not, one thing is certain: Karl Bushby's name is already etched in history as the man who dared to walk the world. This was just one of many incredible moments in history. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you never miss another one.